Chapter 17, Guilt. Razorwing and Saberclaw walked through the woods as quietly as they could. As far as they knew, there could be other Nextari soldiers. Saberclaw had been thinking about why the 10 soldiers that had attacked them were at the school in the first place, and she came to the conclusion that they must have been some sort of escort for Lockjaw. If they hadn't managed to kill all of the Nextari soldiers, then they would have definitely told Rebay about Lockjaw's betrayal. So she was happy that they didn't get the chance to go back to the alien queen. She also was trying to figure out how to explain to Silverspot what had happened. If Silverspot found out about the news recording the battle, she would surely be furious that Saberclaw and Razorwing didn't conceal themselves better. However, Silverspot would probably find out somehow later if they left out the news reporters part of the event's retelling. Then, who knows how angry Silverspot would be. Saberclaw was stuck between a rock and a hard place as she tried to decide what to do. Razorwing was very alert and was constantly looking over his shoulder, making sure they weren't being followed. He walked beside Saberclaw, and his thoughts were very distracted from the path forward. He couldn't stop thinking about why Saberclaw, as Alea, was with Callum in the first place. He had lost sight of her after she ran from the cafeteria, so he was very confused. He finally couldn't stand being confused anymore and asked, "Why were you outside with Callum?" His tone suggested it took great courage to ask this question. Saberclaw brought herself out of her thoughts and looked at Razorwing. She knew that the truth probably wouldn't go over well with Razorwing, but she didn't have the heart to lie to him. She sighed heavily and answered, "Well, he convinced me to trust him. He sort of trapped me in a supply closet and managed to convince me to not escape. Then we went outside together to get some alone time without the noise of the school day." She braced for a harsh reaction. She tried to describe what happened as peaceful as she could, but Razorwing knew she was sugar coating the situation. He gritted his teeth and slammed his fist into a nearby tree. He didn't care about making noise anymore and spoke loudly. "You're telling me that Callum captured you and forced you to trust him? Why didn't you fight him?" He was very angry. Saberclaw backed down, trying to calm him, saying, "It wasn't like that." "Okay, fine, it was, but it doesn't matter anymore. I didn't fight him because I knew that he wasn't going to hurt me." She tried to sound passive, but her words came out as a strained yell. The wind had picked up as they argued, and the birds began chirping loudly, as if announcing something. Razorwing sneered and gave Saberclaw his response. "What are you talking about? He is part of Rebaya's army, and his literal purpose is to hurt you. Why do you trust him so much?" His voice cracked with the last question. Saberclaw didn't understand why Razorwing was so concerned about this when it no longer mattered. Razorwing felt betrayed in a way. He hated the fact that Saberclaw was stupid enough to trust Lockjaw when he has direct orders to kill her. He hated that she trusted him so much that he could easily imagine Lockjaw stabbing her in the back in some way. He looked up at Saberclaw's concerned face and said angrily, "I should have killed Lockjaw when I had the chance. Now, he has managed to gaslight you into thinking that he is in love with you somehow." He watched as Saberclaw froze. He walked closer to her and looked down into her green eyes as he spoke with a concerned tone. "This is war, Saberclaw. Iron Stripe has already betrayed us, and we are severely outnumbered by Rebaya's army. You can't just trust random people because they showed a little interest in you, let alone someone from the other team. You need to wake up and look at what is happening around you. We are losing a war, and you are out here frolicking with one of the most dangerous Nextari soldiers out there. You need to get that through your head." He shook his head and pressed his lips lightly together. He knew that his words would hurt Saberclaw, but he also knew that she needed to hear them. Saberclaw let her jaw drop a little and her eyes widened as Razorwing walked around her and continued forward. She stood there, extremely hurt by Razorwing's words. She knew that Lockjaw was basically an assassin and she was his target, but there was something about him that made her trust him. After all, he had saved her life a couple times now. However, she knew that Razorwing was right. Lockjaw could easily be lying to her and just kill her when he gets the chance. And they were in the middle of a war that the Sentiron have very little chance of winning. Now, Saberclaw was torn between Lockjaw's seemingly loyal attitude towards her and the opposite outcome of trusting Lockjaw. She didn't know what to do anymore, because Razorwing had just dashed her hopes with a few sentences. Saberclaw began walking, blindly following Razorwing because she was too focused on his words to contemplate where they were going or how to get there. Pine needles crunched beneath the robot's metal boots, and branches snapped off of trees as they walked. The ground even shook a little with every step because neither of them were trying to quiet themselves. Both of them were completely focused on other things. Razorwing was trying to ignore how hurt Saberclaw was and just focus on the way back to the cave, but Saberclaw was desperately trying to figure out whether she should trust anyone or not. They soon arrived at the cave and walked in. As lights soon disappeared and the two Sentiron began to see very little, a bright, orange light from the fire began to brighten the tunnels. They had been walking through countless tunnels, following the orange light for about 30 minutes when they finally entered the large cave where Silver Spot was waiting for them. Silver Spot smiled when she saw them, not knowing anything that had happened just an hour before. She spoke with sarcasm. "Took you long enough. I thought I said not to make any pit stops," she joked. Then Silver Spot noticed that Saberclaw's wounds had been reopened and Razorwing now had a large gash in his wing. She frowned and stood up quickly. Silver Spot walked over to Saberclaw first and managed to stop the G in her leg from leaking. She asked frantically, "What happened? Did you get ambushed?" She looked at the two, but got no answer. Saberclaw finally locked eyes with Silver Spot and decided to tell her, "Well, not exactly. We did fight about 10 Nextari soldiers, but we managed to kill them all." Saberclaw waited, hoping that Silver Spot wouldn't question anything else. Silver Spot was proud at such a large feat, until Razorwing spoke up. "Yeah, that is about half of what really happened." He frowned at Saberclaw as she rolled her eyes. He continued, "She was outside on the school campus with Lockjaw, who can also become human apparently, when Lockjaw got attacked, and she refused to leave him. Then, Saber and I had to fight for our lives as we were recorded by some news station." He spoke plainly, but Silver Spot's reaction was anything but plain. She pressed her lips tightly together as she tried to control her anger. "You two were recorded by who?" she exclaimed as she moved over to Razorwing to fix his wing. Saberclaw did her best to explain. "We had no way to hide because we were being attacked, Silver Spot. Some of the teachers at the school noticed us and must have called the news station. That isn't our fault." Saberclaw knew that her choice of words was probably the worst possible way she could have spoken. Silver Spot's head snapped towards Saberclaw as she violently bandaged Razorwing's wound. "You're right. It isn't you and Razorwing's fault. It seems to me that it is just your fault. Now, the Sentiron have probably just been exposed to the world, and we will probably have some sort of FBI team on our trail soon. This is very serious. Saberclaw, why didn't you just get out of there? It seems that Razorwing was just trying to protect you, but you put yourself, him, and now me in danger. What were you thinking?" She shook her head angrily. Silver Spot was usually a very calm person, but now she was furious and was very disappointed in Saberclaw. Silver Spot knew that Saberclaw would definitely be hurt by her comments, but she was just so angry. She actually regretted how harsh she was to Saberclaw, but changed the subject. "So, was Lila at school?" she asked as she tried to calm herself down. Saberclaw felt terrible now, knowing that she had made such a great mistake, and her answer had no emotion. "No, she is definitely being held captive." She looked into the flames, which had decreased in size since the morning. Silver Spot and Razorwing both sighed heavily as they tried to think of a game plan. Saberclaw would have been thinking of a plan to save Lila and the others as well, but she couldn't think of anything but how stupid she was for saving Lockjaw. The guilt was eating away at her. She had no idea how to fix what she had done, but she knew the facts. Lila, Sam, and John were locked away somewhere, probably on Reba's warship. She knew that Lockjaw was on his way back to the warship, and maybe, just maybe, she could get a favor out of him. Saberclaw stood up and began walking out of the cave, but Silverspit stopped her and said, "Where do you think you're going?" she asked. Saberclaw pulled away from Silverspit and replied emotionlessly, "I'm going to get some air, that's all." She continued walking, but Silverspit knew that Saberclaw was lying. Saberclaw hadn't used "I'm," but used "I am" in her reply. Saberclaw usually only did this when something was serious. However, Silverspot knew that there was very little damage that Saberclaw could do at this point, so she let Saberclaw walk away. After a lot of wandering through tunnels, Saberclaw finally walked out of the cave's mouth. Her arm was still broken and throbbing, but her leg was repaired enough to walk and run on. Saberclaw was determined to catch Lockjaw, so she flew upwards to look for him. Her wings still had a hole in it that made flying a struggle, but Saberclaw wasn't going to give up. She spotted a slight glow beneath the canopy of trees that was obviously a trail of spilled G that wasn't Saberclaw's or Razorwing's. She landed near the trail and followed it on the ground. She made sure to be as quiet as she could. She snuck around the woods, following the trail as she tracked Lockjaw. She held her dagger out, ready to strike just in case. Soon, she heard loud footsteps and knew it was Lockjaw. She got closer and saw him. He was leaking G again and was stumbling through the forest as he held his shoulder. He was obviously struggling to walk, so he wasn't very focused on staying quiet. This was probably why Saberclaw could find him so easily. Saberclaw, unsure of whether he would attack her or not, didn't show herself. She called to him from the shadows, "Lockjaw, I need your help." She spoke with a slightly desperate voice, but Lockjaw whipped around and took out his glowing, double-bladed spear. He must have not recognized her voice, because he yelled into the woods, "Show yourself!" His eyes flicked around, waiting to see an attacker. However, Saberclaw walked out of the shadows before him. He let his weapon fall a little, but was still ready to attack. She had her hands by her sides, making sure that she didn't look like she wanted to fight. She spoke with a serious tone, "Lockjaw, I know you have somewhere to be, but I need a favor." He tilted his head in confusion. She had just asked her enemy for a favor. Lockjaw put his weapon back into its sheath between his wings and relaxed his body, knowing that Saberclaw was not a threat. He crossed his arms. Well, what do you need from me so badly that you actually came and asked instead of fighting me for it?" he said, a little cocky. Saberclaw lowered her head in shame, but still answered, "I need you to help me get my friends back." She clenched her jaw, but Lockjaw just laughed. Once he composed himself, he responded, "I was wondering when you were going to notice those humans were gone. Anyway, I've already gotten myself into deep water with the Queen. I'm not going to help you willingly, Saber." He smirked at her, and she cringed at the fact he felt comfortable enough to call her by her nickname. She raised her head with pride and declared, "Fine then. You won't be helping me willingly." She smiled, but Lockjaw was very confused since he didn't know what she meant. She focused on keeping Lockjaw still, and the little gold strings appeared again as she activated her telekinesis ability. She activated one of the strings, and Lockjaw was forced to stand still. His head, however, could still move, so he spoke harshly. He yelled, "What are you doing? How are you doing that? Let me go now." He struggled, but couldn't escape. Saberclaw grinned and walked up to him, making sure not to break her focus as she spoke. "You said you weren't going to help me willingly, so I'll just keep you against your will until Rebay comes and gets you. Then, I will exchange you for my friends. That way, no one gets hurt and I get the humans back." He bared his teeth at Saberclaw threateningly. Every movement made her invisible grasp seem even more tight. Once he realized that he couldn't escape, he smirked and teased. "Well, it looks like you have me captured. What happens now?" he asked in a slightly condescending tone. She huffed at this gesture, but she was the one in control, so she ignored him. Saberclaw walked up closely to Lockjaw because he had stopped squirming and looked up at him smugly. "What happens now is you come with me on your own. Will you do that, or will I have to force you?" She smiled mischievously. Lockjaw didn't know whether to go willingly or not because he wanted to go with her, but he also knew that he needed to get back to Rebay as soon as possible. Not to mention that the alien queen would be disappointed in him if he was caught so easily. Thus, he decided to do both. He lowered his head to her and answered, "Yes, I'll come with you." "Can you let me out of whatever you're holding me with?" He struggled a little as he complained. She broke her focus and dropped him sharply. He landed with a loud thud, but managed to get up on his own. Saberclaw laughed at him, and he rolled his eyes. His plan was for Saberclaw to let her guard down. Then he would escape. She turned her back, believing that he wouldn't go anywhere, and told him to follow her. Lockjaw knew that if he just turned and escaped, then she would be onto him in seconds. Thus, he decided to make sure that she couldn't follow him. Saberclaw thought she had Lockjaw between a rock and a hard place before she heard rapid movement behind her. She turned around just in time to see Lockjaw inches away from her with his spear ready to hit her. She had just enough time to react and dodge the strike, so she grabbed Lockjaw by the arm and tried to pull him to the ground. Saberclaw had used this tactic with Razorwing many times during training, but Lockjaw was much heavier and stronger than Razorwing was. She failed to pin him, and he whirled around, hitting her and shoving her to the side. He went for another strike, but Saberclaw barely moved out of his way. He hit the tree behind her, and she twisted, avoiding his punches. She jumped backwards and flipped just enough to get herself off of the ground and a great enough distance away from him. She shouted, "I should have known you weren't just going to let me capture you. You're so predictable." She lunged at him. She dropped into a crouch and attempted a kick at Lockjaw's legs, but he jumped upwards out of her way and tried to grab her broken arm. Lockjaw knew that Saberclaw's arm was broken since it was bent in an unusual way, so he knew that if he gripped it hard enough, it would cause enough pain that Saberclaw would have to submit to him. She maneuvered herself away from him before he could touch her, and he fell forward a little. Lockjaw turned and sneered. "I'm predictable? That's rich coming from you." He began spinning his spear with impossible speed in his hand. It was moving so quickly that the blades on each end were like blurs. He threw the spear as it spun in Saberclaw's direction. She jumped out of its way, and it missed her barely. Pine needles crunched beneath her weight as she moved, and the wind caught in her wings. The birds had been silent until now. They were chirping loudly. In the distance, a group of crows had cawed loudly and taken flight. The flock of birds soared overhead as they panicked. Usually, this only happened if something big had spooked them, so Saberclaw assumed a bear had shaken their tree or something. Lockjaw magnetized his weapon, and it came flying back into his hands. He spun the double-bladed spear in his hands again and charged toward Saberclaw. She saw him running at her and focused on moving his weapon away from him. She reached out, and her telekinesis activated, sending the weapon flying out of Lockjaw's metal hands. He saw the spear escape his grasp as it was ripped away from him. He gasped as the metal spear landed about 50 yards away from them. While he was distracted, Saberclaw planned to hit him, but she didn't have to. Razorwing came crashing through the woods and rushed towards Lockjaw. Now it made sense why the birds had been so spooked. It was because of how much noise Razorwing must have been making. Razorwing jumped a little to get more force behind his fists and punched Lockjaw in the face as hard as he could. Lockjaw stumbled backwards, trying to recover from the impact. However, Razorwing was furious and reached down to grab a throwing star to kill Lockjaw with. Saberclaw saw this and knew that she couldn't let Razorwing hurt Lockjaw. She rushed over and put herself between Lockjaw and Razorwing. She focused and struggled, but she managed to stretch out both of her hands and hold each of them still with her mind. Saberclaw yelled at Razorwing, "Don't kill him. We need him now more than ever," she warned, but didn't let either of the two robots go. Razorwing argued back, "Are you kidding me right now, Saber? You just got a wake-up call, and you're already going back to trusting Lockjaw? Let me go." He struggled and fought, but Saberclaw's telekinesis was too strong. Saberclaw shook her head. "No, it's not that. We need him for our little hostage situation." She bared her teeth at the thought of Razorwing scolding her again in front of Lockjaw, but she wouldn't put either of them down until they were no longer trying to kill each other. Lockjaw smirked and didn't struggle at all. He looked at her and said, "Well, are you going to take me somewhere, or will we stay here together?" He looked into her eyes as she held him in place. Her eyes softened, but Razorwing interrupted, "Oh no, not happening. Saber, you can let me go now." He fought a little, trying to get to Saberclaw, and she snapped her head back toward him. She quickly let him go, and he regained his full range of movement. He walked up to Saberclaw and grabbed her hand, making sure not to break her focus as he spoke to Lockjaw. "I know what you're trying to do, Lockjaw. You can't sweet-talk your way out of this." His eyes were sharp as he glared at Lockjaw. Lockjaw understood this insult. but knew that he still had the upper hand and stared innocently at Razor Wing with a soft smirk as he said, "I don't know what you're talking about." Saberclaw sighed as she did her best to stay focused. She moved her hand out of Razor Wing's grasp and set Lockjaw free. However, she didn't lightly drop him. She slammed him on the ground, and he struggled to stay standing. He managed to stand back up straight and stayed still. Razor Wing walked over to him and stood nearby, making sure he wouldn't try to escape again. Razor Wing crossed his arms with throwing stars in his hands. "Why did you let him go? He could try to hurt you again." He sighed with annoyance as he continued glaring at Lockjaw. Saberclaw knew that Razor Wing was talking to her even though he wasn't looking at her, so she answered, "Because it was either me let him go or it'd be too easy for you to kill him. I'm sure you can keep him still." She smiled smugly at Razor Wing as she began walking back towards the woods. Razor Wing uncrossed his arms and argued back defensively. "What do you mean kill him?" "I didn't want to dash," he paused. He knew there was no arguing with Saberclaw over this, because she knew that he had intended to kill Lockjaw when she wasn't looking. Razor Wing glanced angrily at Lockjaw before looking back at Saberclaw as he asked, "Where are you going?" "Lockjaw is still here." Saberclaw looked back at Razor Wing with a puzzled look and replied, "Back to our little temporary base to talk to Silver Spot about holding Lockjaw hostage. I assumed you and Lockjaw would follow me." "Why?" She raised a metal eyebrow, showing her confusion. Lockjaw laughed, and Razor Wing looked at Saberclaw with pity and annoyance about how bad of an idea she had. She cocked her head to the side, confused by why Lockjaw was laughing until she gasped in realization. Razor Wing spoke with frustration. "Saber, you don't mean to tell me that you intended to bring the enemy to where we are staying, right?" he asked. Lockjaw was still laughing when Saberclaw answered with annoyance, "Yeah, I see that now." "How about Silver Spot just come to us?" she asked. Lockjaw had stopped laughing at Saberclaw's idiotic decision that she almost made and was now contemplating when to quickly finish off Razor Wing and get out of there. Saberclaw had let him free for now, so he didn't know whether to continue to gain her trust and stab them in the back later or to just get it over with and escape. Saberclaw, as if reading his mind, reaching out her hand to him. The golden strings appeared again, and Lockjaw's arms were forced to his sides. He could still walk, but could no longer move without Saberclaw letting him. Saberclaw tilted her head with smug innocence as she watched Lockjaw squirm. "Well, look who can't move again. I can practically hear you planning something vile right now." She walked up to him, not breaking focus, and taunted him as she stuck her head in his face. "You've lost your free movement privileges." She smirked and looked into his longing eyes with a sarcastic glint. Lockjaw smiled and replied to her, "I wasn't planning anything except to stay here. However, I don't mind if you force me to stay here for a little longer." They were staring at each other as Saberclaw tried to dissect Lockjaw's comment and find the meaning when Razor Wing grabbed Saberclaw, not disrupting her focus, and stood between her and Lockjaw. He glared at Lockjaw as he said, "Oh, no you don't. No vague comments allowed. Am I clear, next Hari?" he barked. Lockjaw looked at him with sarcastic eyes as he answered, "Crystal." Razor Wing rolled his eyes and turned back to face Saberclaw. He asked, "How do you suggest we contact Silver Spot to get her here?" He refused, turned his face to Lockjaw, and crossed his arms again as he spoke with Saberclaw. They argued on what to do for a few minutes under Lockjaw's careful gaze. Then, Saberclaw came up with a solution. "Well, how about I just call for her over the comms?" she suggested as she raised her hand to the side of her head, near her audio receptors that allowed her to hear. She clicked a small button, and she spoke clearly, "Silver Spit, this is Saberclaw. I'm with Razor Wing, and we have a little surprise for you, if you could meet us at the coordinates I'm sending you." Saberclaw out. Razor Wing tilted his head in confusion. He remembered their communication devices being damaged in the heat of battle, so he didn't understand how Saberclaw's was working perfectly. Saberclaw noticed his confusion and stated, "Silver Spot fixed my communication device before I left." She moved her head around Razor Wing's large frame to get a better look at Lockjaw. He was still held in place, but he looked very bored and didn't struggle at all. Razor Wing turned to see what Saberclaw was looking at and saw that she was staring at Lockjaw. He rolled his eyes and walked back over to Lockjaw. He placed his hand firmly on Lockjaw's shoulder, causing Lockjaw to flinch as much as Saberclaw's hold would let him. Razorwing chuckled a little and said, "Well, in the meantime, let's be productive, shall we?" He smirked. He leaned forward and spoke with a commanding tone in Lockjaw's face. "Give us some information about Rebay. What is her next vile plan? You know what I will do if you don't answer." He flicked Lockjaw on the head. Saberclaw saw Razorwing taking advantage of her hold on Lockjaw and felt angry. "Razorwing, what if I just let him attack you back? We don't hurt anyone if they can't fight back. At least not in this situation. Besides, we need him alive and unharmed. He knows that." She crossed her arms and huffed. Lockjaw smirked because she was right. He knew that they wouldn't dare harm him in order to carry out their plan. Razorwing gritted his teeth and grabbed the top of Lockjaw's head forcefully, making Lockjaw look at him. He spoke with frustrated tones. "Fine. I still want to know, Lockjaw. What has that terrible witch been up to?" He tried to be threatening, but Lockjaw felt no fear. Saberclaw sighed and lightly shoved Razorwing away from Lockjaw and forced Lockjaw to his knees with her telekinesis. He landed with a thud, and he looked up at Saberclaw. However, instead of anger, he looked into her eyes with a smug attitude. Saberclaw, noticing this but ignoring it, tried her strategy to get him to talk. Saberclaw extended her index finger and held Lockjaw's head up. She smiled warmly and stared into his eyes longingly. Lockjaw returned this facial expression, and Razorwing started getting suspicious. When he realized what she was doing, he lunged forward and held his hand out to Saberclaw. His voice sounded panicked and slightly jealous. "Saber, what are you doing? Don't do that to him of all people," he exclaimed, sounding rather helpless. However, Saberclaw ignored him. Saberclaw knew she had Lockjaw paying attention, so she spoke with a gentle tone that dripped with attitude. "Now, how about you tell me if Rebay has any plans?" "Please," she asked nicely. Lockjaw thought about Saberclaw's unusually kind question and understood that she was trying to do the same thing that Razorwing tried, just with a little bit of emotional manipulation in the mix. Lockjaw, surprisingly, enjoyed Saberclaw's manipulation and fed into it a little, saying, "Her Highness doesn't have any events planned that I know of, but I would tell you if I knew, Princess." He smirked as Saberclaw's smug face faltered. She hated when he called her that, but it seemed that Razorwing hated it more. Razorwing rushed over and backhanded Lockjaw across the face, and Lockjaw's head whipped to the side. Lockjaw grunted from the pain, and Razorwing glared at him as Saberclaw grabbed Razorwing's hand. She pushed it down and spoke frantically. "Razorwing, what are you doing?" She looked at Razorwing and saw his jealous eyes that softened as he looked at her. Razorwing held both of Saberclaw's hands tightly and said in response, "Saberclaw, he's lying again. Don't believe him. He isn't good for anything right now." He held eye contact with Saberclaw as Lockjaw struggled with everything he had. Lockjaw knew fully that he would not be able to escape Saberclaw's telekinesis, but he didn't want to let some Sentiron disrespect him like Razorwing had. As he struggled, an arrow flew by his head and hit a nearby tree. He stopped struggling and began to panic inside. Saberclaw saw the arrow as well and felt comfort, unlike Lockjaw, whose face showed fear. Saberclaw and Razorwing looked in the direction of which the arrow came and saw Silver Spot walk out of the shadow-filled woods. Saberclaw smiled happily and ran over to hug Silver Spot. The two embraced, but Silver Spot's eyes were focused on Lockjaw. Silver Spot pointed an arrow at Lockjaw and asked Saberclaw, "Is this the surprise? I assume you made him unable to move, but why isn't he dead?" She realized how ridiculous her question was because she knew exactly why Saberclaw had let him live. She let her head fall to the side and her shoulders relax with irritation. "Saber," she trailed off as Saberclaw gestured wildly with her hands. Saberclaw explained, No. Trust me on this one. We can trade him to Rebay for the humans." "It's a foolproof plan," she gestured towards Lockjaw. Lockjaw rolled his eyes because it seemed that everyone except Saberclaw knew that it wasn't a foolproof plan, like she had said. Silver Spot's eyes widened at the young robot's cluelessness as she said, "What? You seem to forget that Rebay is a cruel creature. She will not give up practically priceless bargaining chips for just another soldier. She gestured towards Lockjaw. Lockjaw knew that Silverspot was right, but he took her comment as an insult. Lockjaw's face twisted with irritation, and he bargained. I'm just another soldier. I think I'm more than that, Sentiron. He spoke with sarcasm as Silverspot waved him off, telling him to hush. Saberclaw looked at Silverspot as they discussed with their eyes. They knew each other well enough that they could communicate through gestures and facial expressions. Lockjaw and Razorwing watched, confused, as Silverspot and Saberclaw gestured to one another. Finally, Saberclaw shrugged widely and waved Silverspot off. Well, it doesn't matter anyway. We can interrogate him or something and then try a trade. It's at least worth a shot, even if it doesn't work. She crossed her arms and faced away from Silverspot. Silverspot's face was angry in an annoyed way as she tried to keep Saberclaw's attention. Saber, what if Rebay trades but still tries to kill us again in the process? You need to think about these things. Razorwing sighed as Saberclaw refused to face Silverspot. Razorwing cocked his head to the side and begged Saberclaw. Look, Saber, I get that you want those humans back very badly, but I highly doubt you will succeed with such a lousy plan. It could backfire in your face easily. Saberclaw whipped around to face him and sneered. Her eyes were bright with slight fury as she spoke suddenly. Razorwing, this is a lousy plan, and I know that. It isn't a good bet, but it is our only option here. As far as we know, the humans could already be dead. We need to at least try this. The three Sentiron looked at the ground, not wanting to imagine that the humans were no longer alive. Saberclaw looked up and saw Lockjaw try not to make eye contact with anyone. Her fury bubbled up, and she couldn't control herself. Saberclaw marched closer to Lockjaw and released him. Once he was free, Saberclaw grabbed him by the scruff and yelled at him, "Why do you have to be so useless?" She threw him back to the ground with incredible strength and forced his face back to face her. He struggled against her grip, but eventually managed to stand and hold her arms still. She ignored this and punched him hard. He fell back to the ground, and Razorwing simply watched as the two fought. Lockjaw brought out his double-bladed spear and brandished it, accidentally scratching Saberclaw's arm. This caused her anger to grow, and she pinned him to the ground. Her morals wouldn't allow her to fight him if he couldn't fight back. That is why she freed him. Razorwing and Silverspot knew this and refrained from helping Saberclaw, figuring that she had the situation under control. She used her telekinesis to pin him. He was floating up against a tree, grasping his neck as he tried to get free. Saberclaw grabbed his jaw with her free hand and spoke angrily. "You have 5 seconds to give me one good reason I should spare your life." She sounded evil because she wasn't joking. Razorwing smiled as he watched Saberclaw threaten Lockjaw. Previously, the blue robot had been more powerful than Saberclaw, but the tables had turned. Lockjaw squeaked, "I have critical information about where Queen Rebay is keeping your human allies." He sounded frantic. Saberclaw's eyes widened, and she dropped him. He fell to his hands and knees, gripping his sore neck. Saberclaw made sure that he couldn't run away and turned back to Silverspot. "Looks like the idiot is useful. See? I told you so." She was very angry, but was calming down now, and the guilt of hurting Lockjaw was creeping in. Silverspot laughed and nodded in approval. Saberclaw, not wanting to show her guilt, dragged Lockjaw back up against the tree and crouched down beside him. She looked up to Silverspot expectingly, wanting the medic to come and interrogate Lockjaw instead of making Saberclaw do it. Saberclaw also knew that Razorwing would end up actually killing Lockjaw instead of just threatening, so she didn't want him anywhere near Lockjaw. Silverspot saw this and thought for a minute about what she wanted to do. She gained a soft, cunning smile on her face and spoke lightly with Saberclaw. "You know, how about Razorwing and I just leave you to all of the interrogation business? It seems you are better at it." She began ushering Razorwing away as he slightly retaliated. Saberclaw's eyes became frantic as she gestured wildly for Silverspot to come back, but couldn't get any words out. Silverspot, just before leaving Saberclaw's sight, turned around and winked. Saberclaw, understanding Silver Spot's objective, sighed heavily in frustration and clenched her jaw.